Welcome to Your Financial Advocate with Greg DuPont from DuPont Wealth Solutions. As a practicing advisor and attorney, Greg teaches pre-retirees how to reduce debt and taxes and save with less risk so they have more spendable income and plan their way to a better life. Join us for this journey where Greg draws on years of experience and guest experts to help listeners achieve more spendable income for retirement.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Financial Advocate. I'm Greg DuPont, and I'm here to talk to you today about some unsettling stuff. I do a lot of reading, and I'm going to share some of those things with you today. And a recent newsletter that I have been reading put a lot of stuff into perspective, and I'm going to work off of that today to share with you some of my thoughts. If you've talked to me in the last 18 months or so, you've heard me state the case that I believe that we are going to have a massive market correction that's tied into a complete, shall we say, revolution of some form. Yeah, revolutions come in all kinds of fashions and forms, and I'm not talking about a bloody revolution. I'm talking about revolution like, the New Deal was a revolution. Some would say that when we had the Great Society as a revolution. Some would call the Reagan Revolution a revolution. There are major changes in our society and or our political structure and or our economic structure. And what I see ahead is a major change in our economic structure that's kind of triggered by political changes and sociological changes, all those things that we're feeling right now that gives you the sense of dis-ease. And, most people I work with are, we're trying to talk about retirement, try to get into that mode and look down the road to a future that we've been setting aside our money for all along the way. And we want to have a future that we can enjoy. With the other revolution that we went to, we'll just call it the Reagan Revolution, where we went from skyrocketing interest rates and inflation to skyrocketing market and low taxation. That was the kind of revolution we liked. What's the next one look like? Okay, so let's talk about some perspective. So first, like I said, I like to read a lot. And so this is not just me coming up with these theories out of the ether. This is me thinking about what I'm reading from leading experts. I've mentioned in this podcast and others many times how transformative the book by Ray Dalio, Principles of a Changing World Order, was for me, where he chronicled where we are now and looked at it in the perspective of other great powers throughout history that rose to the position of the dominant economy, that rose to the position of privilege, where their currency was the international standard for trade. Another one I've been recently reading that talks about the society that we're in and how this is a pattern that repeats over and over and over has been the fourth turning is here. I read the other one, the original book, The Fourth Turning. The Fourth Turning is here is an update that's basically puts us where we are now, where they predicted that we would be when they wrote the first book about 20 years ago. And what that talks about, again, is society, the inevitable flow from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next, and how that impacts our culture, how it impacts our resilience, and how it impacts our economy. So the other thing that I look at a lot of times is facts. I'm an attorney. I was I was trained to look at facts. And what are the facts that drive me to be the position that I contend that this major market change / economic change / upheaval is going to happen in the near future? By the way, I do peg it to happen between now and the end of this decade. And that's part of the reason behind my March to a Million, to try to get as many people, 1 million families, into a position of protection before September 30, 2030, when I turn 65. By the way, 1929 was the Great Depression. What will 2029 be? So let's think about what's on the horizon, because I want to read from some of this newsletter I read, and giving credit where credit is due. A fellow by the name of Van Mueller that I follow sets some of these facts out nice and concisely, and I don't like to do more work than I have to. So I'm going to use his work here a little bit and point out some of the things he points out. First, did you look at your instructions for filling out your tax return this year? Probably not in great detail if you did, right? You found out, well, first of all, most of you use TurboTax, so you don't have to look at any instructions. And if you did look at instructions, you didn't need to look deep in the weeds. But in the weeds and in the federal disclosures, as kind of their wont to do, they hide some real solid information within the context of a bunch of superfluous information. And here's what I want to pull out from this. So in their own documentation, they point out that right now we are borrowing over 22% of the funds needed to cover our budget as a federal government. And 58% of 2022's budget went to Social Security, Medicare, federal pensions, and social programs. Okay. So let's think about that for just a second. Are any of those obligations likely to be decreased in the future? Is Social Security going to be decreased? Well, who knows? We're going to talk more about that. Medicare, federal pensions, social programs, all of these have been set up to grow as unfunded liabilities. We'll deep into that real soon here. So the situation structurally, our federal budget, it's out of whack. And regardless of who you're supporting right now, nobody's talking about decreasing the budget, are they? And when at this point in time, 7% of that budget is interest payments on our federal debt. It's a mathematical death spiral. There's no way on God's green earth that we're going to grow our way out of this, no matter what they say and promise. It's just mathematically impossible. We're heading to something different, and we have to prepare for that. They're going to have to raise taxes, right? The structure that they've got right now is not raising enough revenue. Something has to give. Back when we started the 401k era, there were dozens of tax brackets. Now there's seven tax brackets that are out there to generate revenue. And let's talk a little bit about how the future really looks in terms of our debt, deficit, and unfunded liabilities. Because you may have heard some of these numbers, but really you can't hear them enough. It took me a long time before it got through my thick skull that this is really going to blow up in our face. And myself and other people that are still working when this happens, well, we're going to have our own troubles. But people that are on fixed incomes or retirement that don't want to go back to work, or maybe are not able to go back to work, they are going to get really crushed, which is why this is such a mission for me. So right now, we are currently at about $35 trillion of debt in the country. If you've not done this before, go to www.usdebtclock.org. It's a mind-blowing website. When you look at the numbers, continue to flicker and change and increase. So 35 trillion right now. It's predicted that by 2032, there'll be $64 trillion in debt. We are adding $1 trillion of debt every 100 days. And with that debt comes interest, right? We already talked about how much interest is already going from the budget towards service on the debt. How does this end? Well, Dalio suggests that from the history, we've seen the other countries do things to get out of their position of prominence. Okay, it's a repeated cycle over and over again. But it's not only the liabilities of the debt. The unfunded liability for Social Security is predicted by 2028 to be $35 trillion. In 2032, it's forecast to be almost $45 trillion. The unfunded liability for Medicare, $54 trillion. By 2032, $72 trillion. The total of all unfunded liabilities by 2032 is predicted to be almost $400 trillion. Add that to the debt. That makes $464 trillion. The debt service alone on that, how's this going to work? How do we protect ourselves should be the other question. Because it's beyond our comprehension how to fix this. Washington can't fix it. They're not addressing it. They're continuing to delay it. Somewhere along the line, it's going to snap, which is why I have pegged, 2029 and 1929 have an interesting ring to them, don't they? So how will they fill up this gap? When we look at the savings, your life savings, for the people that have saved for retirement, well, there's several trillion right there, right? Depending upon when you've read the article, they keep referring to 74 trillion, 70 trillion, whatever trillion in this wealth that's been accumulated by 401k savers that for years they've talked about how it'll be passed down to the next generation. And now it's looking like it's going to be confiscated. How's the easiest way to confiscate it? Is through taxation. When you think about the way that taxes are generated by this country, as I mentioned, we have 7 tax brackets on federal level. But when you look at the statistics, it's even more stark when you look at the statistics. 50% of wage earners made less than $40,847 last year. 50% of wage earners were under $50,000. Did you know that 90% of Americans make less than $125,000? So where does this money come from? Isn't it true that they're going to have to raise taxes on everything? And speaking of raising taxes on everything, another place to look at is www.truthinaccounting.org, where they chronicle what's going on a state-by-state and city-by-city level with their liabilities and their unfunded mandates. And it's even more troubling at that level. Especially now, a lot of people like to think that they're moving to a state because of there's no income tax. Great. Is that permanent? How about what other taxes we got? Property taxes, sales taxes, use taxes, licensing fees, blah, da, 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 da. By the way, I was in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago, and without knowing it, I get a thing in the mail the other day and said, here is a picture of you. Your car was seen going 12 miles over the speed limit. Please send $100. Oh, and by the way, if you don't pay it by this deadline, then it's $200. It's the way where we are right now. Anyways, these are the reasons that I am so compelled to talk to people about taking more precise look at their current tax situations. Both those people, $125,000, their effective tax rate is somewhere around 9%. So it doesn't make sense if you're in that ballpark to maybe pay the tax man now so he can't get at your money later, to get out of the trap. Most young people that are starting their savings journey, if they are saving inclined, well, the first thing they're going to do is default into paying for the 401k, putting money in there. When they're at the lowest tax brackets of their life, which puts money behind tax walls, which sets them up for a tax bomb in the future. So if you got kids, talk to them about, hey, are you putting a lot away in your 401k? Maybe instead, let's start with, are you in debt? Because debt is insidious. When people think about, I have in the good old days, a 3% mortgage rate, hey, I don't have to worry about paying that off. They don't realize that they're still paying 90 cents on every dollar on interest for most of the life of the loan. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get the point. So we have to start thinking differently. We have a small window of time to shore things up before this inevitable tsunami comes crashing upon our waves, as the government has to adjust. They have to increase revenue sources. They have to continue printing money, which is inflation, which is a stealth tax, isn't it? By the way, on that front, if you know what really happened in the last few years, since 2020, the cumulative inflation rate has 20%. That means it now requires $1.20 to buy what you used to be able to buy for $1. Or $1 is now worth about 83 cents. I had a stark awakening on that just the other day when I was talking to my wife about getting money for going to our cruise in Europe and finding what the exchange rate was with the euro. It's like, wait a second. For us to get 1,000 euros, we got to spend 1,200 US. That doesn't make sense. It's reality, but the point is, this is what's happening right now. And they're playing around with the inflation rate, right? If they would report the CPI appropriately, it would be about 8%. And in 2022, it would have peaked at 18%. So it's incumbent upon us to take the steps we need to protect ourselves. There are ways to do it, as I talk about regularly. Roth conversion, get money out, be more thoughtful in where you're saving right now. Tax-free vehicles down the road, cash value, life insurance, those kind of things that we've talked about. There are tools, but there needs to be incentive. There needs to be action because we are being funneled into a trap. And we have the ability to at least find some way to protect ourselves. I may be wrong about timing. I don't know this stuff. Nobody knows what's going to happen. I hope to be proven wrong. But if I'm right, at least directionally right, and if we can get some more people into the lifeboat, then I can say job well done for my team and myself. And that's what drives me. So it's been kind of a dark conversation here today on Your Financial Advocate, but it's been an important one for you to pay attention to. And start looking for the signs, looking for ways. How can I make just a little tweak, a little change here and there? Because it may be a big difference down the road. So until next time, take care. Be well. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to Your Financial Advocate. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of DuPont Wealth Solutions. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.